Okay, quick vertical scan. We've got transition ideas. We've got to find the right transition. So regardless, that's contrasting, kind of like despite of. Admittedly, it's kind of accepting that it's true. In other words, we would sort of rephrase something more simply. Meanwhile, contemporaneously at the same time. So what's going on here? Plato believed material objects to be crude representations of unseen ideal forms. In his view, such abstract, non-material forms are the ultimate source of knowledge. So knowledge comes from this abstract. Aristotle disagreed, positing that knowledge is best obtained through direct engagement with the material world. So Aristotle says it's material. And then we have a semicolon. So note, a semicolon will be another independent clause that must be related to Aristotle's first clause here. So our next clause must be something about the same idea, that the material world is everything in knowledge. So regardless, not contrasting, that wouldn't be right. Admittedly, possibly, in other words. Yeah, in other words. In other words, sensory experience of the material is the ultimate source of knowledge. Yeah, we're saying it more simply. We're saying the same idea as before the semicolon, but trying to rephrase it for the reader to better understand. We're not kind of admitting it or saying that it's true. We're not saying contemporaneously. It's in other words. Experience of the material is the knowledge. 7C will be correct. By the way, be careful here because we have two ideas. We have one idea. Plato says it's abstract. Aristotle says it's material. Those are contrasting ideas. Don't let that fool you to think that maybe a contrasting transition will be correct, even though we have contrasting ideas here, because the key is to notice that semicolon. The semicolon denotes related ideas or related independent clauses from before and after. So you must be sticking with the whole Aristotle line of thought, not the total contrast in the whole paragraph. Okay, looks like we're looking at contrasting or transitions. Well, I don't know why I said contrasting. We've got in fact, which is emphasizing. In other words, again, simplifying or saying another way. Granted, this one's kind of unusual. Granted, that's kind of, admitting it's true. You might say something in the conversation. Okay, granted, that's true, but that's not really the main idea, kind of thing. So I suspect that would be what granted is going to be used as, if it's correct. As a result is, cause effect. That's a consequence. So let's see what's going on here. 2017 study of sign language learners tested the role of iconicity, the similarity of sign to the thing that it represents in language acquisition. Okay, so they studied iconicity. An icon is basically a symbol, right? So it's a symbol that represents something. An icon for McDonald's is the golden arches, something like that. An icon for Apple computer is the little image of the apple, things like that. Okay. So the study found that the greater the iconicity of a sign, so I assume that's the greater, symbolism or personal understanding of that symbol in language, the more likely it was to have been learned. Okay. Blank, the correlation between acquisition and iconicity was lower than that between acquisition and other factor studied sign frequency. Okay, whoa, this is not entirely clear what's going on here. The study found that the greater the iconicity of a sign, the more likely it was to have been learned. In fact, the correlation between acquisition and iconicity was lower than that. I mean, it could be a fact. I don't think that's right, but possible. In other words, the correlation, no, this is definitely not, that last sentence is not explaining the previous sentence more simply. So B is not going to be correct. Granted, so could I say, the greater the iconicity of sign, the more likely it was learned. Granted, the correlation between acquisition and iconicity. So that's what we're talking about. Acquisition and iconicity was lower than that between another factor studied, sign frequency. So sign frequency, there's something else that's not part of the main claim here in the second sentence, was actually a greater factor or had better correlation. So granted I guess that could be. As a result, well, it's definitely not a consequence. That's not a conclusion of the previous sentence. So now we've got to really figure out what's going on here. Is it going to be emphasizing, in fact, or granted? Granted, that's the case, but so in fact, the study found the greater accuracy system, the more likely to have learned. In fact, the correlation between accuracy was lower than that, but this seems to be kind of like a different idea. It's telling you some different facts. And we gave you the claim above, but there's this other factor that's even important. If it's different, it's not in fact, it's not emphasis. It's going to be granted. Now, I'm not sure granted. I don't love the transition granted myself, but granted, you usually use it kind of when things are a little contrasting. Okay, granted, that's true above the claim we made. The correlation between acquisition iconicity was lower than that between some other factor, assigned frequency. Now, really hard to understand. I'm not sure, do we really know what they're talking about? Not exactly, but you can get a sense that there is something different here. And that should be enough to see granted, which is contrasting or different, is a better answer than in fact, which is emphasis. It's kind of reinforcing the same idea, and it's not the sameness, it's difference.